Hey everyone, welcome back to Upside Down Data. In this video, I'm going to talk about Avalanche and the AVAX token. I'm going to update you on some important news that relates to the fundamentals of Avalanche, and going to take a look at the upside downside potential indicator, or the UDPI for short. And we're going to see what the risk levels are like right now for AVAX in the long term, medium term, and short term. Ultimately, AVAX looks like a really strong hold for the long term. The question is whether now is a good time to buy or hold AVAX, and if not, whether AVAX is going to grant us an entry and what that would look like. So if you guys like the content, subscribe and like the video. And if you're interested in regular updates of the UDPI risk levels for AVAX and 27 other cryptos, follow us on Twitter and you'll get that over there. Let's start with some news that relates to Avalanche's fundamentals. As you can see, the Avalanche Foundation recently announced a huge investment in an incentive program called Multiverse. That's to encourage the growth of what they call a new internet of subnets. This is big news because it positions Avalanche as what's called a layer zero blockchain. And this opens up a world of new possibilities for it. A layer zero is basically a new kind of infrastructure that's built underneath the kinds of blockchains that we're used to, like Ethereum, which are called layer ones. And the idea of a layer zero is that many layer one blockchains can be built on top of it. And that allows them to use the resources of the layer zero to validate transactions, secure the network, and perform other essential functions while still having their own unique characteristics and functionality. From Avalanche, subnets enable anyone to easily create powerful, reliable, and secure permissioned or permissionless networks with custom implementations. This includes features not available on other chains. And when they refer to other chains there, they're talking about their competitors in the layer zero space, especially Polkadot and Cosmos, like selecting which validators secure the subnet activity, which token is used for gas fees, custom economic models, and more. So the reason that Avalanche calls this an internet of subnets, I think it's a good analogy. It's because subnets, which are layer ones, will all be able to interact with each other easily, cheaply, quickly through the Avalanche network itself. And so, as I said, this makes Avalanche a huge contender in the interoperability race. As blockchains develop and more people use them, it's going to be really important that different chains can interact seamlessly. And the two players in that space until now, the major players were Polkadot and Cosmos, and now Avalanche is the third big name vying for market share in the interoperability space. Just a few days ago, the first subnet launched on Avalanche. This is the DeFi Kingdoms subnet. DeFi Kingdoms is a hugely popular GameFi dApp. It's called GameFi because it's a gamified version of decentralized finance. So that's what DeFi Kingdom is. It was originally launched on the Harmony blockchain, and its token Jewel made investors quite a lot of money over there, and now it's come over to Avalanche as its second home. So with the launch of DeFi Kingdoms, Avalanche is officially in the layer zero interoperability game. This is not news in the sense of being surprising because we knew that the subnets were coming, but it's definitely bullish to see Avalanche's plans coming to fruition. And some of the early results clearly show the benefits of subnets. So for example, on the day that the DeFi Kingdom subnet launched, the number of transactions processed by the Avalanche blockchain increased by about 30%. At the same time, some validators, which validators are people who are running staking nodes to help secure the network, they didn't even notice the increase because they had not chosen to participate in specifically securing the DeFi Kingdom subnet. So this shows how the subnet model allows Avalanche to scale up, taking on 30% more volume than the day before when the DeFi Kingdoms subnet launched. And so processing a lot more activity in a distributed way that doesn't stress the network, even in a segmented way that parts of the network won't feel at all. So the question is, at least the question that I've been wondering about, and that I imagine some other folks might be wondering too, especially with this launch of DeFi Kingdoms and the news about the Subnet incentives program, is now a good time to buy Avalanche or to hold Avalanche, or is it better to wait? And We're going to next take a look at some of the technicals and try to get a sense of that. And we'll look at the price chart, and we're also going to look at the UDPI, the upside downside potential indicator, to get an idea about the risk levels. What's the realistic upside potential for Avalanche in the near term and also in the long term? And what's the realistic downside potential? So let's take a look over at the price chart on Avalanche. Price is a little over $94 now, slightly red day, as is the case for most of the market. Bitcoin has been pulling back slightly over the past couple of days. And if we put things in a little bit of a broader context, we can see that over just the past couple of weeks, Avalanche put in a pretty substantial 58% move. Now it met resistance at 100, got rejected off that important psychological level, and looks maybe to be rolling over a little bit here and losing some steam. We don't really have too much of an edge if we look, for example, at the RSI. Again, this is on the daily. There are no obvious divergences here. I mean, the price has made this 58% move with a moderate degree of momentum that really hasn't looked like overextending itself just yet. One thing that we can take note of is this uptrend that the price has been in that remains intact over the past, couple of months. As long as there's a higher low made somewhere in this region, that would suggest that the trend can be expected to continue. And then we would look for potentially a break of 100 sometime not that long after that. That's the key level to watch the upside right now, obviously, that 100 level, which it hasn't been able to break and hold yet, even though it's tried on a couple of different occasions. Back in November, again in December, and then in a less enthusiastic way just now a few days ago. So the next question is, what does the UDPI have to say about this? The upside downside potential indicator, which is our risk indicator here. Let's take a look at the UDPI for Avalanche. So here's the long-term UDPI for Avalanche. Each dot on this chart represents a day, and each day is color-coded by long-term risk. When you see red, that means high risk from a long-term perspective. And when you see deep green, that means low risk and a lot of upside potential at that point in time. When we talk about long-term, we're really thinking about at least a period of months and even up to a period of years. And so when we interpret this information, that's the kind of time frame that we want to have in mind. And we can see that using it this way has performed pretty well historically. Back in the middle of 2021, for example, the risk level on Avalanche was very low. It was well into the green, and that preceded an enormous run up over the next few months. But in this more recent drawdown, we did not see the long-term risk levels for Avalanche reach those low levels that would indicate a lot of upside potential. Instead, the risk levels came down from their elevated levels that they were at toward the end of 2021. But for the most part, we've been in a pretty yellow range. So that indicates that the model considers there to be approximately equal realistic upside potential and downside potential for Avalanche on a long-term basis. What about if we look on the medium term? Well, here we see that there's more change that happens a little bit more quickly because the medium term is oriented toward weeks and months. And so we did get some green action here at the bottom of this downtrend in early 2021. The UDPI got pretty low for Avalanche and was definitely flashing accumulation from a medium-term standpoint. Now, though, we're again back in this relatively neutral range. On the short term, we see that change happens even more quickly on the scale of weeks generally, and we saw some pretty low-risk regions in the recent past on multiple occasions. One was at that bottom in January, and then again at the bottom before this 58% run up just a couple of weeks ago. To bring it back to the question that I started with, is now a good time to buy or hold Avalanche? And if not, when would we be looking for an entry if you're someone who believes in the long-term fundamental future for Avalanche? Well, then at the very least, waiting for a better entry on the short-term basis seems reasonable. We don't know if we're going to get low risk on the long term anytime soon. It doesn't happen that often. I mean, it hasn't happened since the middle of 2021 on the long term, and it hasn't happened, depending on where you draw the cutoff, for a couple of months on the medium term, but the short term is more likely to get there. When we looked at the price chart a few minutes ago, we saw that trend line that the price of AVAX has been respecting over the past few months. And if it were to revisit that trend line in the near future, that could bring it down to the low 80s and potentially below that, even into the upper 70s. And so that's something concrete that you could look for if you were interested in making an entry into Avalanche, is a pullback back to that trend line, maybe in the lower 80s or upper 70s, looking for the UDPI in the short term to flash a more favorable entry, perhaps something like -2 or lower. And that would be a more strategic entry than where it's at right now, which again is about $94, having just gotten rejected for the third time off of $100. If we just take these together and look at these in terms of the gauges, I mean, this pretty much sums it up. These are all pretty neutral. In fact, the long-term UDPI is at exactly neutral right at the moment. That doesn't happen that often. And the medium and short term are on opposite sides ever so slightly. So not financial advice, of course, make your own decisions, but based on the UDPI information and the trend line that we saw on the price chart, there's probably a good reason for waiting a little bit to see what AVAX does and to see what the rest of the market does too, after a period of a couple of weeks with some relative bullishness. At the same time, there is so much to be bullish about for Avalanche's long-term future because of the technology that is rolling out, because of the fundamental developments, the news that is coming out about its investments in its subnets, about the launch of its first subnet, DeFi Kingdoms, and future subnets that are going to be rolled out over the course of this year and beyond. So, we want to keep two things in our head at the same time about Avalanche. That, ideally, we would get a better entry if we were looking to establish a position, and not financial advice, but that's my best read of the data. But also that, that's very much worth doing because Avalanche has a bright future. So that's a bit about the fundamentals as they look right now for Avalanche and the AVAX token. That's a bit about the technicals on the price chart and the upside downside potential indicator. So I hope you guys found this update on Avalanche useful. Thanks for watching.